I always thought my life was going to be perfect. I mean, who wouldn't? I had it all. A loving husband, Robert, a beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood, and a job that didn't stress me out too much. Everything seemed like it was falling into place. I met Robert a few years ago, and I swear, it was like fate. He was charming, funny, and at first, seemed like he genuinely cared about me. I remember the day we got married like it was yesterday. The church was beautiful, and everything felt right. But I don't know, something changed after that. Little things started to bother me. The way he'd leave dirty clothes around the house. How he would forget to help with chores when he knew I was busy at work. At first, I thought it was just the normal stuff married couples go through. But soon I realized it wasn't just normal. What really threw me off was the day my dad called me with bad news. It had been months since we'd spoken, but I always kept in touch with him. He was my rock, the one person I could always count on, even when things went bad. And now, he had some terrible news. "Kate," he said, his voice cracking on the other end of the line. "I'm really sorry to say this, but I've been diagnosed with terminal cancer. The doctors don't give me much time." I froze. My dad, the strongest person I knew, was dying. I couldn't even process it at first. I felt like the ground beneath me was slipping away, and I had no idea what to do. "Dad, what do I do?" I whispered. "You just keep going, sweetheart. You have your life, and you need to live it. But you're my daughter, and I want you to know I love you." I stayed on the phone with him for hours that day, asking questions, trying to make sense of it all. But deep down, I knew nothing would ever be the same. My world had just turned upside down, and I couldn't even talk to Robert about it. When I told him, his response was cold. He didn't seem shocked or upset. It was like he was brushing it off. "That's tough," he said, and then he went back to watching TV. It was as if he didn't even care. I didn't ask for much. I just needed support. I needed someone to hold me, to tell me everything was going to be okay. But Robert wasn't that person. He was too focused on his own problems, his own life. Days turned into weeks, and I was spending all my free time with my dad. Robert didn't care. He didn't even bother to ask how I was doing. Instead, he was busy with his job, playing golf on weekends, and hanging out with his friends. At first, I thought it was just because he didn't know how to deal with grief. But after a while, I realized maybe he just didn't care. One afternoon, while I was sitting at my dad's side in the hospital, Robert texted me. I didn't want to look at my phone, but when I did, my heart sank. It wasn't a comforting message, not even close. "Hey babe, I was thinking about what we should do with the house after we're married. Maybe we should think about buying something bigger. I was also looking at some investments, and I think we could use that extra cash from your dad's inheritance to get us started. I'll talk to you more when you get home." I stared at the text for a long time. My dad had just been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and Robert was already thinking about the money he might get from my family. I couldn't believe it. It felt like he wasn't even looking at the bigger picture. It wasn't about the house, or money, or anything like that. It was about my dad's life coming to an end. It was about the time I had left with him. But Robert didn't see it that way. For him, it was just another opportunity to get ahead. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became. I felt like I was the only one taking things seriously, the only one who actually cared about what was happening in my life. And that's when I realized I was alone in this marriage. I wasn't the only one carrying the weight of the world. Robert was too wrapped up in his own dreams to see what I was going through. It hurt, but at the same time, it made me question everything. Was this really the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with? As the days passed, my dad's condition worsened. But instead of being there for me, Robert started talking more and more about our financial plans. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Was this really how he saw our future? Was he really that insensitive? I just needed to be with my dad. I needed someone to hold my hand through this. And Robert wasn't that person. He was just a man who wanted to make money, with no understanding of what was truly important. The next few weeks felt like I was living in a fog. Every day, I drove to the hospital, sat by my dad's side, and pretended to be strong. He was getting weaker, his voice softer, his hands colder. But he still tried to smile, still tried to make me laugh, even when I knew he was in pain. "You know, Kate," he said one night, his voice barely above a whisper, "I always thought Robert was a good man, but I don't see him here." I felt my stomach twist. I hadn't told my dad about how distant Robert had been. I didn't want to add to his worries, but he noticed anyway. Of course he did. My dad always noticed everything. "He's just busy with work," I muttered, though even I didn't believe the words as they left my mouth. Dad chuckled weakly. "Too busy to be here for his wife? I don't like that." He coughed, and I quickly grabbed a cup of water for him, helping him take a sip. "Kate, listen to me," he continued. "A man who loves you doesn't leave you alone in times like this. He stands beside you. He carries your pain with you. He doesn't think about money while you're breaking." I didn't say anything. I just held his hand and tried not to cry. When I finally went home that night, I was exhausted. My body ached, my head pounded, and all I wanted was to crawl into bed and forget about the world. But as soon as I walked through the door, I realized Robert had invited people over. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. I found him in the living room, sitting with his friends, a drink in his hand, looking completely relaxed, like nothing was wrong, like my dad wasn't dying, like I wasn't falling apart. "There she is," he said, grinning when he saw me. "You're home early." I didn't even know what to say. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Robert, can we talk? In private?" He sighed, like I was ruining his night, but he got up and followed me into the kitchen. "What's up?" he asked, taking another sip of his drink. I stared at him, feeling something inside me snap. "Are you serious? My dad is in the hospital, fighting for his life, and you're here, throwing a party?" Robert rolled his eyes. "It's not a party, Kate. It's just a few friends. I needed to relax, okay? Work's been stressful." I let out a bit of laugh. "Work? You're stressed because of work? My dad is dying, Robert, and you're here drinking like nothing is happening." His expression darkened. "What do you want me to do, Kate? Sit around and mope all day? That's not going to change anything." I shook my head, feeling tears burn behind my eyes. "I want you to care. I want you to act like my dad's life means something to you. I want you to support me instead of acting like this is just another inconvenience in your life." Robert sighed heavily and rubbed his temples. "Look, I know this is hard for you, but I really don't know what you expect from me. I can't fix this." I stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "No, you can't, but you could at least try." I didn't say another word. I turned around, walked past his friends, and went straight to our bedroom, locking the door behind me. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to hear his excuses. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, my dad's words echoed in my mind. "A man who loves you doesn't leave you alone in times like this." The next morning, I woke up to find a message from my dad's doctor. His condition had worsened overnight. They didn't know how much time he had left. I rushed to the hospital without even telling Robert. He didn't ask where I was going. He didn't care. When I arrived, my dad was barely conscious. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale. I sat beside him, holding his hand, whispering to him even though I wasn't sure he could hear me. "I'm here, Dad," I said softly. "I'm right here." His fingers twitched slightly, and I felt my throat tighten. "I love you," I whispered, pressing a kiss to his hand. "I love you so much." His breathing slowed. Then, finally, it stopped. The room was silent. For a moment, I felt like the world had stopped spinning. Then the doctor placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I'm so sorry for your loss." I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt the tears drip onto my lap. My whole body shook, and I buried my face in my hands. My dad was gone, the one person who had always been there for me. I don't know how long I stayed in that hospital room, staring at the bed where my dad used to be. It felt like hours. Eventually, the nurses told me I had to leave, and I forced myself to stand up. When I got home, the house was silent. Robert wasn't there. No note, no message, nothing. I sank onto the couch, feeling completely empty. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Robert. "Hey babe, I've been thinking. Now that your dad's gone, We should talk about what we're going to do with his house and the inheritance. Call me when you're ready." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling with rage. My father had just died, and all Robert cared about was money. Something inside me shifted. For the first time in a long time, I saw things clearly. Robert wasn't my partner. He wasn't my support. He wasn't even my friend. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life with a man like him. I stared at my phone for what felt like an eternity, my fingers tightening around it until my knuckles turned white. My father had just died, and Robert was already thinking about money. There wasn't a single word in his message about me, about how I was feeling, about my loss. Just business, just property, just him. I took a deep breath, trying to stop my hands from shaking. I wanted to scream, to throw my phone across the room, to call him and tell him exactly what I thought of him. But instead, I just sat there, letting the weight of everything sink in. After a while, I stood up. The house was dark, quiet, almost suffocating. I couldn't stay there, not with the ghosts of my memories clinging to every corner. I grabbed my keys, my coat, and walked out the door. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. I found myself driving to my dad's house. It was strange being there without him. The air smelled the same, faintly of old books and coffee, but the silence was deafening. I walked through the living room, running my fingers over the framed photos on the wall. Pictures of him, of me as a kid, of the life we had before everything fell apart. I sat down on the couch, curling my legs up beneath me. This house had always been my safe place, my refuge, and now it was just another reminder of what I had lost. A knock at the door pulled me out of my thoughts. For a second, I thought it was Robert, but when I opened it, I found my dad's lawyer, Mr. Jensen, standing there. He was an older man with kind eyes and a worn leather briefcase tucked under his arm. "I'm sorry for stopping by so late," he said, "but I thought we should talk." I stepped aside, letting him in. He sat down at the kitchen table, placing his briefcase in front of him. "Your father left behind some important documents regarding his estate," he explained. "I wanted to go over them with you." I swallowed hard. "Is it about the house?" He nodded. "Yes, but also something else. Something he wanted you to know." I sat down across from him, my heart pounding. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Jensen opened his briefcase and pulled out a sealed letter with my name written on it in my dad's familiar handwriting. "He wrote this for you before he passed," he said gently. "I think you should read it." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. I traced the edges with my fingertips, almost afraid to open it. Finally, I took a deep breath and unfolded the letter. "My dearest Kate, if you're reading this, then I'm already gone. And I hate that. I hate that I won't be there for you when you need me most. But if there's one thing I need you to know, it's this. You deserve more than what you've been settling for. I've watched you shrink yourself down for Robert. I've seen the way he makes you doubt yourself, the way he takes and takes while giving so little in return. And I need you to understand that this is not love. Love is not supposed to make you feel lonely. Love is not supposed to make you feel small. I didn't raise you to accept less than you deserve, Kate. And I sure as hell didn't work my whole life just to have him take what I've left behind. That's why I made sure he can't touch a single cent of it. The house, the savings, everything, it's all yours. And if he tries to fight you on it, don't let him win. Be strong, my girl. And when you're ready, walk away from him. You owe yourself that much." Tears blurred my vision as I finished the letter. My hands clenched the paper so tightly that the edges crumpled. My father had seen everything. He had known, and he had done what I couldn't. He had protected me, even when I was too blind to protect myself. I wiped my face quickly, looking up at Mr. Jensen. He really made sure Robert gets nothing. Mr. Jensen gave a small smile. "Your father was a smart man. He knew exactly what he was doing." I let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded, gathering his papers. "Take your time processing everything. But if Robert tries anything, call me immediately." After he left, I sat there for a long time, staring at my dad's words. My entire life had just changed in a single night. But for the first time, I felt something other than grief. I felt clarity. I drove back home, feeling like I was carrying a secret that burned in my chest. When I walked in, the house was still empty. Robert hadn't come home. Maybe he was still out with his friends, drinking and pretending like nothing had happened. I didn't care. I went to our bedroom, grabbed a suitcase, and started packing. Clothes, toiletries, my favorite books, anything I could fit. I wasn't going to wait around for him to come back. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me into staying. Halfway through stuffing my things into a bag, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Robert. "Babe, we need to talk about the house. I think it makes sense for us to sell it and split the money. Call me when you're done being emotional." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. The arrogance, the entitlement. He really thought he had a say in any of this. I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up my suitcase, grabbed my car keys, and walked out the door. I wasn't coming back. I drove without a destination, the city lights blurring as I blinked back tears. The weight of everything pressed against my chest, grief, anger, relief. I had left, really left. There was no turning back now. I pulled into a parking lot near a small motel. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough. I checked in, dragging my suitcase inside a room that smelled like cheap air freshener and cigarette smoke. Sitting on the bed, I exhaled deeply, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed again. "Robert." I ignored it. Then another message came. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to come home. This isn't funny, Kate." I clenched my jaw. He still didn't get it. A minute later, another text. "Are you seriously leaving me over this? Over some stupid house? You're being dramatic." I almost laughed. Of course, he thought this was about the house. He thought I was just another obstacle in his way, something to negotiate with. He had no idea. I put my phone on silent, tossing it onto the nightstand. I was done explaining myself. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had been hit by a truck. My body ached from stress and exhaustion, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. There was too much to do. I grabbed coffee from a gas station down the road and parked outside my dad's house. My house now. That thought still felt strange. I unlocked the door, stepping inside, breathing in the familiarity. I needed to figure out what to do next. Sell the house. Move in. Leave town altogether. Before I could decide, a loud knock at the door made me jump. My stomach twisted as I walked to the entrance, already knowing who it was. Robert stood there, arms crossed, sunglasses covering his eyes. "Kate." I didn't say anything. He sighed, stepping closer. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "About what?" He scoffed. "Don't do that. Don't act like you're the victim here." I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." He took off his sunglasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Look, I get that you're upset, but you disappearing like that was low, Kate." I almost choked on my own laughter. "Low," I repeated. "You think I was low? You're making this way bigger than it needs to be." I felt something snap inside me. "You don't get to tell me how big this is. You don't get to decide how I should feel about losing my father. And you sure as hell don't get to walk in here and act like you're the one suffering." He rolled his eyes. "This isn't just about your dad, Kate. We have a life together. We have plans. You can't just walk away from that because of some letter." I inhaled sharply. "You read it." His jaw tightened. "Yeah, I read it." The anger in his voice sent a chill through me. He wasn't here to apologize. He was here because he was losing. "You're really just going to take his side?" he continued. "Like he wasn't the one who made your life miserable growing up? You hated him, Kate." I flinched. He wasn't wrong. My dad and I had a complicated history, but that didn't change what he had done for me in the end. Robert took a step closer. "Look, I know you're hurting. I know you're confused. But we can work through this. You and me." I stared at him, wondering how I had ever loved him, wondering how I had ever convinced myself that this was okay. "You don't love me," I said finally. His face hardened. "That's not true." "Really? Because you didn't ask me how I was doing. You didn't check if I was okay. You didn't hold me when I cried. You didn't do anything but talk about money. And now that you know you're not getting any, now you suddenly care." His expression shifted, something dark flickering in his eyes. "That's not fair." "No," I whispered. "What's not fair is me wasting years of my life thinking you were someone you're not." Silence stretched between us. Then quietly he said, "So that's it?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Yeah, that's it." He nodded slowly, as if he was processing the words. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. I didn't watch him go. I just shut the door, locking it behind me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I stood by the door for a long time, listening to the silence that followed Robert's departure. My heart was still pounding, but I wasn't sure if it was from anger or relief. Maybe both. I took a deep breath, pressing my forehead against the wooden surface, grounding myself. It was over. I moved away, my legs feeling heavier than they should as I walked through the house. The memories were thick in the air. My dad's old chair still sat in the corner, his books lined up on the shelves, some with folded pages, like he had just stepped away and would be back any moment. The kitchen smelled like dust and something faintly familiar, like coffee that had seeped into the walls after years of being brewed in the mornings. I sat at the table, running my fingers along the wooden surface. I remembered sitting here as a kid, watching my dad read the newspaper while I picked at my breakfast. We never talked much in the mornings, but it had been a routine, something steady even when everything else in my life felt chaotic. I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter, the one that had started all of this. I had read it a dozen times already, but I needed to read it again. "Kate, I know I was never the father you needed. I know I pushed you away when I should have pulled you closer. I could blame a lot of things for that, pride, regret, fear. But in the end, none of it matters. What matters is that I don't have much time left, and there are things I need to make right. This house is yours now. I wanted you to have something solid, something that no one could take away from you. I know Robert won't like it. I know he'll try to talk you out of it. But this is yours, Kate, not his. And there's something else. Something I never told you." I stared at the next lines, my breath catching like it had every time I read them before. "Your mother didn't leave us because of me. She left because of him." I shut my eyes, the words burning into me like they were fresh all over again. I had spent my whole life believing my father had driven my mother away, that he had been too hard, too distant, too impossible to love. And maybe some of that had been true. But the part one never knew, the part he had kept from me, was that she had left because of Robert, because he had been involved with her. I clenched my fists, pressing them against the table. I didn't want to believe it. I had fought against it in my head, telling myself there had to be some mistake. But my dad had no reason to lie, not in his final days. Robert had always been older than me. I had met him when I was barely 20, and he had been in his 30s. It had seemed romantic back then, how he had been so sure about me, how he had known exactly what to say to make me feel special. But now, looking back, I saw things differently. I saw the way he had always been in control, how he had shaped my world into something that revolved around him. And my mother, had she been as naive as me? Had she believed in his words the way I had? Or had she known exactly what kind of man he was and left because of it? The questions clawed at me, but there was no one left to answer them. My mother was gone. My father was gone. And Robert, he was the only one left standing, still trying to manipulate me even now. I opened my eyes and looked around the house. My house. My father had given me this because he had known I would need something to hold on to when the truth shattered everything else. I wasn't going to run from it. I pushed myself up from the chair, grabbing my phone. My fingers trembled as I typed out a message. "We need to talk." I stared at the words, hesitating for only a second before hitting send. It didn't take long for him to reply. "Finally, my place or yours?" I scoffed, shaking my head. Of course. He would make it sound like I was coming back to him. The house. Come alone. There was a pause before his next message came through. "Fine. Be there in an hour." I set my phone down, my stomach twisting. This was it. The confrontation I had been avoiding for too long. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him. I walked through the house, locking the back door, checking the windows. Maybe it was paranoia, but something about the way Robert had looked at me before he left unsettled me. He hadn't been angry. He hadn't been desperate. He had been calculating. And that scared me more than anything. An hour later, I heard the knock at the door. My pulse jumped, but I didn't hesitate. I opened it, keeping my face unreadable. Robert stepped inside, looking around like he was inspecting the place, like he still thought he had some claim to it. He turned to me, smirking. "So what's this about? You changed your mind already?" I took a slow breath, my fingers curling into my palms. "I know about my mother." His smirk faltered for the briefest second before he covered it with a laugh. "What about her?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "I know why she left." Silence. His eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. And for the first time, I saw something behind them. Not just annoyance. Not just arrogance. Fear. I had him. And he knew it. Robert's smirk was gone. The moment those words left my mouth, I saw the shift in his expression, the tightening around his eyes, the twitch in his jaw. He wasn't used to being caught off guard. He wasn't used to me standing my ground. He took a step closer, slow and deliberate, like he thought he could still intimidate me. "Kate, I don't know what kind of nonsense you've been reading, but whatever it is, it's not true." I held my ground. "It's true. My father told me everything." His lips parted slightly before pressing into a thin line. He was thinking, calculating. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head, trying to decide which version of the truth would get him out of this. "Your father hated me," he said finally, his voice smooth, controlled. "You know that. He never thought I was good enough for you." Of course, he'd say something like that. I shook my head. "No, he left me this house. He warned me about you. He didn't have a reason to lie, not when he was dying." A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe even panic, flashed in his eyes before he covered it up with a scoff. "Jesus, Kate, do you even hear yourself? You're letting a bitter old man turn you against me. I loved you. I still do." I almost laughed. The way he said it so casually, like love was some kind of bargaining chip he could throw on the table when it suited him. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have lied to me for years." I shot back. "You wouldn't have pretended that my mother was the villain in all of this when you were the reason she left." His shoulders tensed. "She left because she was weak." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. My breath caught in my throat. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling harshly. "She wasn't some saint, Kate. She wasn't a good mother. She wasn't a good wife. And she sure as hell wasn't a victim." He looked at me then, his eyes cold, calculating. "You think I chased her away? No. She left because she wanted to. Because she was selfish. Because she didn't love you enough to stay." I felt something inside me crack, but I didn't let it show. That was what he wanted, for me to break, to let doubt creep in. But I knew better now. I took a slow breath. "She left because of you. Because of whatever it was you did to her. And now, you're trying to do the same thing to me." His lips curled into a humorless smile. "And what is it, exactly, that you think I did?" I stared at him, feeling the weight of my father's letter in my pocket. The truth was there, in my hands. But there were still gaps, things left unsaid. I needed him to fill them. "Tell me," I said, my voice steady. "Tell me the truth for once in your life." His eyes flickered to the door, like he was debating whether this conversation was worth finishing. But then he exhaled, tilting his head slightly. "You really want to know?" I didn't move. He took another step closer, lowering his voice. "Fine. She wasn't some innocent woman who fell into my arms, Kate. She wanted me." My stomach twisted, but I didn't flinch. "She was miserable," he continued, watching my face carefully. "Your dad was a cold bastard, and she wanted out. I was there. She made her choice. And when it got messy, when she realized she couldn't have both me and you, she ran. Left you behind. That's who she was." His words scraped against my skin like glass. I wanted to believe he was lying, twisting the truth like he always did. But there was something about the way he said it, something about the certainty in his voice that made me question everything I thought I knew. I clenched my jaw. "You're disgusting." His smile widened, amused now. "Maybe. But that doesn't change anything." He leaned in slightly. You can hate me all you want, Kate, but in the end, I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who raised you, loved you, took care of you. Not her. I felt sick. I had spent years convincing myself that Robert had been my protector, that he had been the one person in my life I could trust. And maybe, in some twisted way, he had believed that too. But the truth was, he had never been my savior. He had been the reason I needed saving. I stepped back, putting space between us. You're a liar, and I want you out of my life. His face darkened, his amusement fading. Careful, Kate. Or what? I challenged. You can't control me anymore. You don't own me. And you sure as hell don't own this house. His jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw it. The moment he realized he had lost. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, it is. I walked to the door and opened it. He stared at me for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Then, without another word, he stepped outside. I shut the door behind him, locking it. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding, but I didn't cry. Not this time. I was done letting Robert define my past. Now, it was my turn to take control of my future. The silence in the house felt different now. He was gone, but his presence still lingered in the air like a heavy shadow. My hands trembled as I pressed my back against the door, listening for any signs that he might come back. Nothing, just the sound of my own breathing, uneven and shallow. I forced myself to move. I needed to do something, anything, to keep from spiraling into the chaos of my thoughts. My feet carried me to the kitchen, where I poured myself a glass of water. My fingers tightened around the glass as I replayed everything Robert had said. Was he lying? Twisting the truth to manipulate me like he always did? Or was there something real buried under all his poison? I pulled the letter from my pocket, my father's words staring back at me. He had warned me. He had tried to protect me, even from the grave. But there were still too many missing pieces. I needed answers. My mother had been nothing more than a ghost in my life, a name barely spoken, a memory blurred by time and lies. If I wanted the truth, I had to find her. I grabbed my laptop and opened a search engine. My mother's name, Elizabeth Monroe, felt strange on my tongue as I typed it in. I held my breath as the page loaded. There were a few results. Old addresses, a wedding announcement from before I was born. But one thing stood out, a social media profile. I clicked on it. The photo was recent. A woman in her 50s, her hair lighter than I remembered from the few pictures I had seen as a child. But it was her. The same sharp cheekbones, the same piercing blue eyes. My eyes. She was alive, and she was living less than 2 hours away. A wave of emotions crashed over me. Relief, anger, fear. Why had she never reached out? Did she ever think about me? Did she regret leaving? I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. What was I even supposed to say? I took a deep breath and started typing. Hi, Elizabeth. I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. Calling her mom felt wrong. Too soon. Too personal. I erased the message and started again. Hi, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm Kate. Your daughter. My pulse pounded as I hit send. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then 2. Nothing. I checked the message status. She had seen it, but she wasn't replying. The rejection stung in a way I hadn't expected. I shut my laptop and tried to push away the gnawing feeling in my chest. Maybe she wouldn't respond. Maybe she wanted nothing to do with me. But then, late that night, my phone buzzed. A new message. Kate, I wasn't sure if I should respond. I never thought I'd hear from you. There's so much I want to say, but I don't know where to start. I swallowed hard. My hand shook as I typed back. Start with why you left. I pressed send and waited. The 3 little dots appeared on the screen, blinking, disappearing, then reappearing. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched, waiting for Elizabeth's response. Seconds stretched into minutes, and I started to wonder if she had changed her mind about talking to me. Then, finally, the message came through. I left because I had no choice. I frowned, my fingers tightening around my phone. No choice. That was too vague, too easy. I wanted more. I needed more. What does that mean? I typed back, my hand shaking. A long pause. I could almost feel her hesitation, as if she was weighing whether or not she should tell me the truth. When her next message arrived, it was longer this time. Your father wasn't who you think he was. When I got pregnant, he wanted me to disappear. He told me to get rid of you. I refused, so he made sure I wouldn't be a problem. I had no money, no support, and no way to fight him. He took you away from me, and I wasn't strong enough to stop him. I tried, Kate. I really tried. But he made sure you never knew the truth. I read the message twice, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. My father loved me. He raised me. He was strict, yes, but he always provided for me. He was the one who stayed. But what if everything I believed about him was a lie? I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to reply. Why didn't you come back for me? I did. But every time I tried, your father shut me out. He had money, power, and connections. He could make things disappear. He made me disappear. I was young, alone, and scared. I thought if I stayed away, maybe you'd have a better life. A better life. My father had given me structure, stability, and discipline. But had he also stolen something from me? Had he taken away the chance to know my own mother? I didn't know what to believe. I don't know what to say. I finally admitted. I don't expect you to believe me right away, Kate. I just needed you to know the truth. And if you ever want to talk in person, I'm here. I stared at her message for a long time. A part of me wanted to shut my phone off and pretend this conversation never happened. But another part of me, the part that had spent years feeling like something was missing, was screaming at me to go meet her. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced with memories, trying to fit this new information into the life I had always known. My father had been controlling, yes. He had always made it clear that it was his way or nothing. But had he really done something this cruel? By the time the sun rose, my decision was made. I was going to meet her. The drive to her town was quiet. I barely registered the music playing through my car speakers, too lost in my thoughts. What would she look like up close? Would she be anything like I imagined? Would she regret this as soon as she saw me? I pulled up to the cafe she had suggested and parked. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I had faced a lot of difficult moments in my life, but this was different. This was a confrontation with my own past, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what I was about to find out. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and walked inside. She was already there, sitting at a corner table, a coffee cup in front of her. And when she looked up and met my eyes, I saw it. The same blue as mine, the same uncertainty, the same pain. I didn't know how this meeting would go. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her, or if I even should. But I was here, and that was a start. I stood there, frozen, my feet glued to the floor as I stared at the woman sitting in front of me. Elizabeth, my mother, the woman I had spent my entire life believing was either dead or had simply abandoned me without a second thought. And yet, here she was, real and waiting for me. She gave me a small, hesitant smile, her fingers wrapped around the coffee cup as if it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I forced myself to take a step forward, then another, until I reached her table. "Kate," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight I wasn't prepared for. I nodded, unsure of what to say. Seeing her in person felt even stranger than our text exchange. She looked familiar and unfamiliar all at once. I could see pieces of myself in her. The curve of her jaw, the sharpness of her nose, even the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Can I get you something?" she asked, nodding toward the counter. "Coffee? Tea?" I shook my head and sat down across from her. My throat felt too tight to drink anything. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I didn't know how to start this conversation. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Then she exhaled shakily and said, "Thank you for coming." I looked down at the table, tracing an invisible pattern on the wood with my finger. I almost didn't. I wouldn't have blamed you. I lifted my eyes to hers, searching for something. Regret, pain, sincerity. Why now? After all these years, why reach out to me now? She took a deep breath, her grip on her cup tightening. Because I couldn't keep pretending that staying away was the right thing to do. For years, I convinced myself that I was protecting you. That as long as you were safe, it didn't matter if I was in your life or not. But I was wrong. I should have fought harder. I should have found a way to be there. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Why didn't you? Her face twisted in pain. Your father, he made it impossible. He had money, power, and a way of making people disappear when they became inconvenient. Every time I tried to get close, he shut me out. I had nothing, Kate. No resources, no support. The courts sided with him because he had the means to make them. I was just some young, broke woman who had no way of fighting back. I wanted to deny it, to say she was lying, but deep down, I knew she wasn't. My father had always been the kind of man who got what he wanted, no matter the cost. He was calculated, strategic, always in control. It wasn't hard to believe that he had done whatever it took to keep me away from her. Still, it didn't erase the years of pain, the nights I spent wondering why she had left. You should have tried harder, I whispered. You should have done something. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I know, and I will never forgive myself for not being strong enough. But I never stopped thinking about you. Not for a single day. Something inside me cracked. I had spent my entire life believing she had never looked back, that she had walked away without a second thought. And now, hearing her say this, seeing the raw emotion on her face, I didn't know what to do with it. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling sharply. I don't know how to feel about any of this. She nodded slowly, as if she had expected that. I understand. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Kate. I want you to know the truth. And if you ever want to ask me anything, I'll be here. I looked down at my hands, my mind spinning. This was too much. Too fast. I had spent years building a version of my life that didn't include her. And now, in the span of a single day, everything had changed. I need time, I admitted. Take all the time you need, she said softly. I'm not going anywhere. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. She didn't try to stop me, didn't ask me to stay. She just watched as I turned and walked out of the cafe, my heart pounding. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if I could let her in or if I even wanted to. But for the first time in my life, I had a choice. And that terrified me more than anything. Robert stood frozen in front of me, his face pale, his mouth slightly open as if he was trying to find the right words, but failing miserably. His mother, sitting beside him, clutched her handbag as if it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The divorce papers I had just placed on the table between us seemed to suck the air out of the room. You can't be serious, Robert finally muttered, shaking his head. I am, I said firmly. This marriage is over. His mother scoffed, rolling her eyes. Oh, please. This is ridiculous. You don't just throw away a marriage over a disagreement. We're a family. I let out a small laugh, more out of disbelief than amusement. A disagreement? That's what you call stealing from me. That's what you call making plans for my inheritance behind my back. Acting like my father's death was just a payday for you too. Robert's jaw tightened. We were just thinking about our future. Our future, together. I thought we were a team. A team. A team where only one person makes the decisions and the other just has to go along with it. Where you and your mother dictate what happens with my money while I sit quietly and nod. That's not a team, Robert. That's control. And I'm done with it. Robert rubbed his hands over his face. Look, I made a mistake. Maybe I got carried away. But we can fix this. I love you. I don't want a divorce. Love, I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. You don't love me, Robert. You love what I provide. You love what I bring to the table. But love? No, because if you did, you wouldn't have done what you did. His mother shifted in her seat. Don't be dramatic, dear. This is all just a misunderstanding. Let's be adults about this. I leaned forward, my eyes locked onto hers. Oh, I am being an adult who is setting boundaries, an adult who refuses to be taken advantage of, and an adult who is walking away. Robert's face twisted in desperation. So that's it. You're just going to throw everything away. You think you'll be fine on your own. I smiled. feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I know I'll be fine on my own, and better yet, I'll finally be at peace. Silence filled the air between us. Robert's mother muttered something under her breath, shaking her head, but I didn't care anymore. I had made my choice. I stood up, grabbing my bag. The papers are there. My lawyer will be in touch. Goodbye, Robert. I turned and walked away, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their approval. I was finally free. In the following weeks, the divorce process began. Robert fought at first, trying to claim he deserved a portion of my inheritance. But the law was clear. An inheritance was not marital property. He had no claim to it, no matter how much he and his mother wished otherwise. Eventually, reality hit him. The money was gone from his reach, and so was I. He tried to apologize again, tried to win me back, but my answer never changed. One afternoon, I stood in what used to be our home, now officially mine, watching movers pack up Robert's remaining things. It was the final step, the last tie being severed, and as I stood there, I felt nothing but relief. For the first time in a long time, I was choosing myself. Months later, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sunset. My life was my own again. No more manipulations, no more guilt, no more feeling like I had to constantly prove my worth to someone who never truly valued me. I had lost a husband, but I had gained something far greater myself.
Thank you very much for watching. Did you like this story? Like, subscribe, and write a comment about your opinion.